You may start.
Am I audible?
Yes.
A very warm welcome and a very good evening to everyone present here. To introduce SpeakSmart, at SpeakSmart, we believe that communication works for those who work on it. The key to effective communication is practice and to be a lifelong student. SpeakSmart, headed by Sreela Mitra, who is certified by Trinity College London in effective communication skills, helps you implement, communicate, and think. SpeakSmart is an institution that works on personality development, confidence building, uh, public speaking, and lateral thinking skills. Though it does all of this for its students, SpeakSmart is their comfort zone where they can express all their perspectives openly without the fear of getting judged. Today, the 19th of December, is the day we marked across our calendars as the day of the big debate. The name in itself is proof of how much we look forward to the discourse of various perspectives. The motion for today is society can subsist without formal education, and I'm certain that everyone here has questioned this before. This event is organized by the SpeakSmart Student Wing, which consists of SpeakSmart senior most students who are passionate public speakers and are certified by Trinity College London in effective communication skills. Without further ado, I'd like to request Manasvi to take over.
Thank you, Sneh. Sreela Mitra is a woman on a mission to create thoughtful leaders by teaching effective communication skills. She founded the organization SpeakSmart in 2010 and has been teaching impactful and effective communication skills herself for over 2 decades. Sreela ma'am, who is certified by Trinity College London in effective communication skills, has quite literally been shaping future leaders at SpeakSmart, encouraging them to pursue their dreams, making their mark, and to keep growing. Having garnered by both love and experience on her journey, she looks forward to this session. It is our honor to have you with us, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Manasvi, and best of luck to all the participants and wing members on having a great event. So I don't actually want to take up time and discuss the motion because I'm going to leave that to the speakers, because if I define it, then I don't know whether it comes through as biased. But yes, I do believe that communication is a great tool, because you can say, I love you, you can start a war. So go ahead. Hopefully it's a loving war today. So let's start up.
Over to you, Nitya.
Okay. I'm going to introduce the moderator. Being an enthusiast of 1900s music, stand-up comedy, and procrastination, Suryansh Basu Malik is also a 16-year-old with a fascination for the art of public speaking, often ready to have discussions on a plethora of topics. Exemplifying the same, the high schooler founded his own organization centered around public speaking that covers topics that hold a concoction of his interests, from news, martial arts, and of course, debating. Under his organization, That's What That Was, he writes articles, makes news clips, hosts podcasts, and connecting to the Speak Smart debate, he hosts and moderates his own debates. Having dealt with a plethora of motions in the capacity of an adjugator, speaker, and moderator, he looks keenly upon facilitating this debate.
Thank you.
Now over to you, Muskan.
No, Suryansh, you can go ahead if you were saying something.
Sorry.
I was just saying thank you very much. A lovely introduction.
Thank
It's our
you.
pleasure. Now over to Muskan.
Muskan isn't here today, so I'll be introducing the participants today. So on the leading the proposition side today, we have Parikshit Roy Chaudhary, a student of class 12 at St. Xavier's Collegiate School. Parikshit was the most informal yet experienced and skilled voice in the room. Then we have Pradyum Nahata, a student of class 10 at La Martiniere for Boys. Pradyum is more than the name he carries and is sure to leave you thinking. Then we have Anuj Poddar, also a student of class 10 at La Martiniere for Boys. Anuj is all in for a grilling debate and whose performance we especially await. On the opposition side today, we have Mohana Sengupta, a student of class 10 at Modern High School for Girls. SpeakSmart has heard Mohana earlier and continues to be impressed each time. Then we have Rohini Patra, a class 11 student at Loreto House School. Rohini brings something fresh and new to the table and is the most distinct voice in any session. Last but not the least, we have Suryansh Jalan, a student of class 9 at St. Xavier's Collegiate School. Suryansh is sure to make this debate a good grill. We look forward to hearing all of you. Now I would like to hand over to Suryansh, our moderator for today.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vaishali. And before we begin, I'd like to run everyone here, the participants, once again, through the rules and regulations and the flow of today's debate. Now, there will be two teams, the government and the opposition, as this is a parliamentary debate. They will consist of the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the government whip, and on the other side, the leader of the opposition, the deputy leader of the opposition, and the opposition whip, respectively. Now, all the speeches will be 5 plus 2 minutes long, except that of the leaders, who are allowed 5 plus 3 minutes. And the order of the speakers alternate between the two teams, which in essence is the Prime Minister, followed by the leader of the opposition, then back to the Deputy Prime Minister, so on and so forth. Now, at the end of all 6 speeches, there will be a reply round starting with the opposition, and the duration for each of the replies will be 1.5 minutes, 1.5 to 2 minutes. Now, during a speaker speech, we have allowed the other team to ask questions to the speakers. Now, the speaker speaking at the time may choose to take the question or not, which is completely their choice. Now, if they do decide to entertain the question, they must respond to the question within 15 seconds. If she decides not to entertain the question, they may simply nod it away and move on. Now, there are a few rules and regulations that SpeakSmart has set out for today's debate, which is that as each side has been assigned to every speaker, they can refer to any points written on a paper, but are of course requested to refrain from reading out of it. Plagiarism and reading off of websites will be highly looked down upon and can be caught almost immediately. And please note that we may disqualify any participant at our discretion on grounds including cheating, misconduct, or cyberbullying. And the chat box will be open to all participants and attendees. Constructive criticism and encouragement for participants are always welcome, but virtual etiquette is to be maintained at all times and will be strictly enforced if noticed otherwise. All participants are to keep their videos on at all times and their microphones muted throughout, except when they are speaking, of course. And finally, the judges' decision are, of course, final and binding and cannot be questioned. For the speakers' note, and the audience as well, the speakers will be marked on their content and research, their presentation style, their arrangement of matter, their clarity, their use of logic, persuasion, oration, their use of illustrations, relevance, and rebuttal. That being said, we will begin, as of course, as stated, with the leader of the government, which I believe is Parikshit. So Parikshit, when you're ready, you may have the floor.
I believe there's a mistake over here.
Yes,
The leader of
there's a mistake.
the Prime Minister is Anuj.
Yeah.
Right. My apologies. So Anuj, being the Prime Minister, you may begin. You have 8 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours.
Am I audible and visible to all?
Yes, you are, Anuj.
All right. So today's motion states that this House believes that society can subsist without formal education. Now let us start with highlighting some of the key words in today's motion, defining them, and then moving on. Now, firstly, society. This House believes that society. What is society? Society is a group of individuals or entities who are extremely tight-knit. It consists, they have similar or same culture, traditions, a political authority. They're communities and groups which strive on interdependence and social interaction. Secondly, subsist. This House believes that society can subsist. Now, subsist means to sustain, to endure, and to exist. And thirdly, formal education. This House believes that society can subsist without formal education. Now, formal education is a structured and systematic form of teaching which is highly generalized and standardized. It does not cater to the individuality of the student, but rather is vast to the audience it caters to. Now, let us learn on who the stakeholders of today's debate are. The people who will be affected and whose ramifications will be felt by today's motion are students, the people who are learning, and then society at large. And finally, what is the mandate of today's debate? What are we debating upon and what are we not debating upon? Now, understand, we are not debating upon maintaining the status quo, and neither are we debating upon removing the concept of education or removing the concept of educating on whole. Rather, we're speaking on sustenance, on existence, and the replacement of a concept of formal education with a new meaning of informal education. Now understand what side opposition has to do to fail the motion. They have to speak on how by removing a concept of formal education, society will cease to exist, how society will not be able to sustain itself, which is untrue because not only does formal education not consist of the fabric of society, by removing a concept of formal education, culture, traditions, and a political authority will not cease to exist. What constitutes society is humans, the people interacting and interdependent upon it. And humans will only cease to exist if there is an apocalypse, which is something removing formal education and replacing it with informal education cannot do. Let's take, for example, the major transition of culture and even education Russians had when they transitioned from their era of serfdom and the Tsar rule after the Bolshevik era. Now understand, not only did their culture evolve, not only did they get new traditions, but the way the people were treated, who the people were treated as, and who these new people were, what these new people were educated was completely changed. But did this mean the Russian society ceased to exist? No, because society consists of humans, the most adaptable species, they always adapt to the new stimuli to sustain themselves. So any motion, any argument, any constructive side opposition comes up here and says will not stand. It cannot fail the motion because formal education cannot decapitate and can never remove humanity. Now understand who created formal education, who formal education caters to, and why formal education will fail us eventually. Understand today, take for example the Indian formal education system, which is highly adapted from what the Britishers provided to us. Now, what the Britishers provided to us was made to create a group of anglicized Indians who do not question authority, who follow instructions, and deter to a timetable to work as office clerks. Now, I'm not saying that we are absolutely following the British system of education, but I am saying that formal education still caters only to instructionalism. It does not cater to the individuality of each other, neither does it cater to how diverse we are. I am studying 10 subjects in my class, of which I like only 2. Now, another student in my class might like 4 subjects, none of which match mine. But the formal education system does not respect the individuality of a student because it is so generalized. It can never respect the dignity of a student's specialization. Understand that you might say, side opposition might say, well, everything has a bane and a boon. Yes, formal education is not the best, but what is informal education offering that it is not bad, that it will still sustain society? Now understand, informal education not only provides responsiveness when interacting within the environment, not only does it allow possibility to act freely in an unknown situation, not only does it allow autonomy and free choice, a change in interest, and not only does it allow dialogue and respect uniqueness and individuality. What school, the formal education system has done, is supposed to do is to prepare us for the real world. 15 years, we learn in school how to prepare for the real world. But eventually, we have to employ vocational techniques. We have to use work education, and we have to do internships to adapt to the real world. This is something that 15 years of formal education does not prepare you for. Informal education does exactly that. It offers autonomy, free thinking, dialogue. It offers you to think for yourself, to learn more, to answer more, something that the instruction based system of formal education does not give to the learner. Moreover, I will speak on what my further speakers, what the second speaker and third speaker will be telling us. Today, my second speaker, Parikshit, will be reintroducing to us classic Socratic pedagogy and how and contrasting the formal education system with political instructionism. He will be speaking on the social stability and how it is dependent on improved and independent interaction, the Brady-Johnson grand social polymath deconstruction theory, and finally also refuting some points side opposition might come up with. My third speaker will further only focus his given time on refuting the points side proposition comes up with. Today, I have proved, and my further speakers will prove, that no matter what argument side opposition comes up with, it can never fail the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Anuj. That being said, we'll now move on to the next speech from the leader of course, the opposition, which is, I believe, Mohana Sengupta. Mohana, are you with us?
Yeah.
Right.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are both audible and visible. Mohana, feel free to begin when you want to.
Okay. We just heard the proposition's interpretation of the motion. I am the leader of the opposition, and we, the opposition, are present over here to convince you that society, in fact, cannot subsist without formal education. So first, it is important to understand what the entire motion means as a whole and what its different words mean as well. We'll first go with the most important of them, society. So in sociological term, society, it refers to a group of people who live in a community that can be defined and share the same culture. On a broader side, a society also consists of the people and the institutions around us, our shared beliefs, our traditions, and our cultural ideas. And typically, more advanced societies also share a political authority. So according to the sociologist Gerhard Lenski, he defines societies in the terms of their technological sophistication. So basically, as a society advances,
1 minute,
it does
Mohana.
its use of-
Sorry, I think there's a raised hand. Suransh, if you could take note.
Right. Right. Parikshit, there's a question. Mohana, would you like to entertain it?
Yeah, sure.
Right. Go ahead.
Right.
Parikshit.
Thank you for your definitions, first of all, ma'am. When you're speaking about how society is defined by shared beliefs and a common circumstance, then how do you think a community and a society are different? Where do you draw the line between a community and a society? What is the difference between the two?
A community is a small group of people who live together, and yes, they do share the same beliefs and systems, but a society is an even more larger group which stands upon an infrastructure.
Right.
I hope that
Okay.
answers your question.
Yeah, hopefully it does. Carry on.
Okay, so basically, as I mentioned before, he divided society into 3 different parts based on the advancement of their technology. So these 3 different categories of society are basically pre-industrial society, industrial society, and post-industrial society. Now, obviously, if we bring the pre-industrial societies into the spectrum of our discussions, the question of pastoral, agricultural, horticultural, as well as hunting-gathering societies also come into play. However, we have to consider the time period that we are speaking about. Now, in the current situation in this century, it will be very difficult for a hunting-gathering society to exist. On the other hand, pastoral, agricultural, and horticultural societies are indirectly or directly supported by formal education. Therefore, saying that societies can exist completely without any sort of formal education is not even true, even in the case of these societies. Furthermore, when I'm talking about societies, it can also be defined as a large group of people who live together in an organized manner and make decisions about how to do things. The only possible way in which a society can exist and function in an organized manner.
I'm going to just stop you for a second. Parikshit has his hand up again.
Right. Parikshit, you have another question. Mohana, would you like to entertain it?
No.
Right. Carry on.
So basically, the only possible way in which a society can exist and function in an organized manner is by maintaining discipline, which is again a virtue that is provided definitely by formal education. In the case of non-formal or informal education, as the Prime Minister suggested, it allows us to act freely. So it doesn't really give us a set routine to follow, which can help us develop our self-discipline. And while we are talking about societies, it is important to mention that we will give further stress on virtual societies because that is exactly where we are residing right now. If we go on to the next most important word of the motion, it is subsist. So to subsist means to be basically able to support oneself or exist or to be able to persist and continue. So when we're talking about the existence of a society in the world, we refer to it being able to remain, flourish, and be able to function. However, over here comes the importance of the word continue, which is also a definition of subsist. A society can function for a short time based on informal or non-formal education. However, what about the next few centuries or even the next few years? Without a proper systematic form of education, which is based on a structure and routine, the societies, especially the younger generations, will not be able to learn anything. Furthermore, as explained before, with the advancement of time, there are also more developments and advancement of technology. If even a section of the society does not receive formal education, then neither can you expect the society's continuation or to be more
Mona, I'm
practical.
sorry to interrupt again. Would you take Parisha's question?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, when we were talking about agrarian societies and pre-industrial societies, do you think, and when you're talking about subsistence and functionality of societies, do you think an agrarian society or a pre-industrial society is dysfunctional?
No, it is not dysfunctional.
Right. Carry on.
Okay. So if we ask the proposition and everybody else present over here to pay further to give more attention to the motion, then it clearly states that society can function without formal education. So what does this imply? It simply means that society will be able to exist without any sort of formal education. And that is a hilarious thought, because that is like almost asking us to have a debate without any motion in place, which is technically not possible. A society can still function only dependent on formal education without the addition of informal or non-formal education, but the exact opposite of that is not possible. A major example of this is when formal education first started in Greece. They not only devised one of the first pictographical writings, but also gave formal education in many different aspects. They believed that for proper functioning of the democracy that was in place of their culture, education was very important. Now, the proposition might as well try to refute this point by saying that the lower classes of people and the women did not receive any sort of formal education. However, they cannot deny the fact that a part of the society, which was the men, they still did. And that also in arts, cultures, tradition, along with academics and martial arts. They received this in a systematic manner from a proper teacher who gave them education. Thus, saying that a society can exist without absolutely no formal education is false. Furthermore, talking about just formal education,
Mona,
we must
I'm so
consider...
sorry. I sincerely apologize for cutting you off again, but Parikshit has another question. Would you be willing to entertain it?
Yeah.
Right, go ahead.
Right, ma'am. Since you're talking about education being started in ancient Greece, then what are the differences that you see between classical pedagogy, which was introduced in ancient Greece, especially by Socrates and Plato, as compared to the instructional pedagogy, which is more of a realist school of pedagogy that's being used in modern times, especially in the post-industrial era? Since both pedagogies are normally considered to be different, then when you're comparing both as means of formal education, where do you see the differences existing?
Can I refrain from answering this?
Yeah, no, not a problem. Just you can choose to answer later or not at all. Go ahead.
Thank you. Furthermore, talking about just formal education, we must consider the fact that formal education is not completely devoid of informal education. We go to systematic infrastructures and learn things based on a syllabus which we apply. So this application part of it is a major part of informal education. A big example of this is the debate that we are having right now. We could all read and understand the motion and its implications because we receive formal education. However, all of us are present over here because we want to apply what we have learned and try and gain some knowledge and experience from each other by debating. Thus, by being a part of a strict structure of formal education, we automatically and quite unknowingly...
Mona, I'm so sorry for interrupting you again, but as your time is ending now, I think we'll have to conclude with the question from Pradyum, if you want to take it.
Okay.
Right, go ahead, Pradyum.
Right, ma'am, in your speech, you mentioned the example of ancient Greece and you spoke about how they were systematically being taught about martial arts and stuff. And you gave it in the context of it being formal education. Do you not think that informal education can be systematized?
If if informal education is systematized, then in some way or the other, because you're following a system, it does become formal education, right? For example, I remember the Prime Minister speaking about that you need to take internships and you need to learn something for the vocations that you're going to pursue after you've got out of school or a university. For that, even vocational schools and internships are a sort of system that you adhere to learn something from them.
Right. With that, I think we'll conclude the speech. Thank you very much, Mohana. A good response. I can say that from my own side. And now moving on, we'll move on to the Deputy Prime Minister. Of course, proposing the motion, Parikshit Roy Chaudhary. Parikshit, you may begin when you feel free to.
Right. Thank you so much, Suryansh. So members of the House, let us first understand the basic meaning of what a society is and how it's different from small communities. When the first speaker of the opposition comes and tells us that a community is simply a smaller set of societies, then that is absolutely incorrect and we question it. Essentially, a community is a group of people with a shared belief, a shared understanding of circumstances, as the first speaker has already stated. However, the difference between a community and a society is that a society is the largest subset of communities, which ensures that there is always a level of interaction or an independent interaction amongst people. However, a shared belief, a shared circumstance is not a stakeholding part of the meaning of a society. That being said, let us also understand the very fact that when we asked the first speaker of the opposition said that a pre-agrarian society or a pre-industrial society is not dysfunctional. That is in exact opposition to her own statements when she divides the three parts of what our understanding of formal education's history has been, when she's saying that when we go back to pre-industrial, pre-agrarian or agrarian societies, then those are dysfunctional. However, she again states that they are not and they are contradicting themselves. That being said, let me go into the very contentious point when they're talking about Greek pedagogy or Greek schooling being introduced. Let us understand what classical pedagogy is. The pedagogy that was proposed by Socrates and Plato. It was essentially a set of questions that will be asked to students and they have the ability to answer them and get to their own conclusions. If there are any flaws in their understanding of a particular subject or an idea, the entire ambit of that was to ensure that there are questions that are being asked and students lead to their own conclusions and understand the subject on their own. That being said, let us understand what realist pedagogy today is. Realist pedagogy is essentially instructional. It is something that was started in the post-industrial revolution era to ensure that schools become a production facility for workers in factories. What that essentially entails is that students are given certain instructions, certain truths that they are made to believe, certain beliefs that they're forced upon themselves. What that essentially creates is a society that is directed or disciplined, in the words of the opposition itself, to believe certain ideas. How does that create a dysfunctional society? Because there are people who are not thinking on their own freedom and on their own free will, but people who are made to believe certain ideas. And therefore, when we remove this idea of formal education, of post-industrial, of realist pedagogy from society itself, we are creating a much more stable society, primarily because it is not based on the beliefs that impose on certain people. To further elucidate, let us understand the very word which the opposition has used, which is that formal education is required to maintain discipline. Let us understand how Nazi Germany utilized schools in a way of maintaining discipline. The SS schools, the SS-run schools, were given certain directions. They're given certain texts that had to be taught to the students. There were certain beliefs and propaganda that had to be taught to students. Let us understand how maintaining discipline occurs in modern China in Uyghur re-education camps. Children are sent to re-education camps where they are told that the Chinese premier is the greatest person in the world, or in other similar terms, and that they are supposed to believe in the Chinese policies and in the Chinese political setup, which the Uyghur community as a whole usually does not tend to do. What that essentially tells us is that this form of maintaining discipline is essentially a form of indoctrination. And therefore, when we remove this from society, why do we still believe that society subsists? Because these are the dysfunctional societies that constantly go into conflict, constantly go into revolution, and we understand that a free-thinking society is a more balanced society. This, when we on to the second point, where we're talking about social stability, is dependent on an improvement and an independent interaction of people. How does a free think? Now, let me take you back to the Oxford Union, where Radhika Singh, Professor Radhika Singh of Cambridge University, comes and tells in an address at the Oxford Union that there is something called free thinking education policy, which she has created at Cambridge University, where they're talking about how people with their own merits and having the ability to understand a text or understand education or understand any form of vocational training on their own ensures that there is a balanced society, primarily because there are no concentration of certain intellectual ideas, certain intellectual beliefs, or certain skill sets. what modern education does in terms of formal education is that there is a set of syllabus-based instruction that is given to students, which may not be covering the entire political or the entire sociological ambit of the entire society. Let me take you back to how, again, this is exactly what despotic governments and despotic societies do. This is exactly what formal education was intended to do. A set of people who are good at following orders, who are good at following the instructions that they're given, who are good at maintaining the instructions that are given in the workplace, and only know the ideas that are taught to them, primarily because that is what creates productive efficiency in a factory. However, that again creates a dysfunctional society, as was proposed by the professor from Cambridge University, as to how in the modern society, when we're looking at education at large, even a blacksmith has as much importance into a society as a doctor, and it is not necessary that schools must be teaching only a set piece syllabus, which was also a contention of the opposition when they come and tell us that a syllabus and a set of instructions given to students which they are made to believe is something that is very important. This brings me on to the Usupian model of education. When we look at the third point, when we're bringing out over here, let us clearly understand what this Usupian model of education is. In the simplest form, in Uzupis, which is a part of Romania, we understand how education works. And when we understand the entire ambit over here, education system, or the formal education system as you know it, does not exist in the town of Uzupis, primarily because over there students or children are allowed to question whatever they see around them. And then if they are interested into knowing how electricians work, they're allowed to go and question them and understand how the work happens. If they're interested in being a blacksmith or a doctor, they're free to do that. So again, let me take you back to what my Prime Minister said. What sort of informal education systems are we talking about? We're talking about vocational training. We're talking about internships. We're talking about experience-based learning. We're talking about independent study. And these are the things which students will be able to take on their own system. Again, that is not any other argument as to understanding how society as a whole, or society as an improved form of subsistence, especially in terms of independent interaction or an improved form of interaction amongst people, will be harmed in any way. Let us look at the last point, which I might bring forward to the house, where we are talking about the Brady-Johnson grand social polymathy deconstruction theory. What this essentially entails is that in the simplest form, people who are specializing in their own abilities.
Start wrapping up.
Right, sure, sir. So when we essentially understand over here that it's a society that is comprised of people of different capacities, of different capabilities, of different abilities, who are experts in their own field, creates a much more stable society, primarily because then there's no level of mediocrity that is encouraged in the society itself. However, in a society where everybody has the same education, a syllabus-oriented education and instruction, what we essentially encourage is mediocrity in the society. However, a society of experts, a society which is passionate about the work that they're doing, in a grander sense of the society, becomes a polymathic society, as was proposed by Professor Brady-Johnson of Yale University. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you for the speech, Parikshit. Good points well made, Parikshit. And we'll now be moving forward with the next speaker for today's debate, which is the deputy leader of the opposition, which is Rohini Patra. Rohini, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Okay, taking over Parikshit Roy Chaudhary is a difficult task, but I'll try to accomplish it to the best of my ability. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, now I find it exceedingly strange that any member of the proposition team can bring itself in favor of the motion when today's debating procedures is being taken place from a formal institution that educates its students regarding debating skills, enhances their public speaking capabilities, and gives them confidence and exposure. And these very members and candidates are essential members of the society, because through this, what they garner is their knowledge, basic understanding, and viewpoint, which acts as essential contributions for the subsistence of society. Now, point has been raised that formal education has a set curriculum, to which I agree. And so does a country which is run upon by laws and regulations. It should be understood that these are not objections or limitations, but detrimental factors for progress. A set curriculum with syllabus and teachers as facilitators will help students have a better understanding of the topic and in-depth knowledge, to which I also agree that it caters to the benefit of a larger section of the student body society and generalizes the
Rohini,
concept.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Parikshit has another question. Would you like to take the question or move on?
I would like to move on, then I'll take
Right.
Move on now. Okay. So a point has been made regarding imposing ideas on people who go to formal education. Now, let me remind ourselves as Indians, just because the idea of liberty and fraternity was imposed upon our people through the means of formal education, were we able to have the real concept of liberty and fraternity from different revolution and finally move onwards towards it. Now, formal education, it has been many times the practicality and experience of formal education has been questioned by various members of the proposition team, to which I would like to provide with examples. Since practicality was questioned, I present you with some examples. Business schools around the world, they provide students with real world competition through their entrepreneurship programs so that students have their experience. Law school students, they are given practical cases to be handled so that they can have better improvisation of the judgment that is given and the other things that is there. Pilots in flying school, they are not just left with the theoretical knowledge of the various parts of an aeroplane, but they are also taught how to
Rohini,
fly it in practical experience. Yes, Parikshit.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but yeah, Parikshit, if you want to go ahead.
Yes. Go
Right.
ahead.
So thank you so much for your speech, ma'am. Now, when you're talking about how business schools and law schools are giving experiential learning programs to the students, then are you not contradicting your own definition that has been given by your side when you're talking about formal education to have a set-piece curriculum, a syllabus, and a form of instructionism that's being followed? Because in terms of a business event or a mock trial, there's no
Yes,
set-piece
certainly.
instructionism that's followed.
Over here, sir, we are not talking about the definition of what is there in the syllabus. We're talking as syllabus as a whole, sir. So I hope that answers your question. Secondly, moving on to my last example, that is doctors. They do have practical experience of working on body, that is anatomy. That helps them gain experience and formally moving on. Next, building network. Formal education gives you the most important aspect of your life, making friends, and then move on. The university life, it gives people an opportunity to come together, nurture themselves. Now, to add on to this point, I would like to give you the example of Google, Facebook, DHL, and Airbnb. These institutions prove that how co-founders met in university, they nourished, they grew, they nurtured themselves, and this is how an entire virtual society was formed, thus building a network of virtual society as well as your own friends network, which you're going to be cherishing for the rest of your life, which a self-educational systems through non-formal or informal means of education cannot provide to you. Moving on, developing alternative skills. Schools or colleges, they give you a platform to either develop or learn your own skills or to project your own skills. Whether it is done willingly or deliberately, that comes at a later question. But it gives you a platform to do so and gain your own confidence. And for the subsistence of the society, yes, sir.
Right. Rohini, I'm so sorry to bother you again. Parikshit, if you could keep your question last for the very ending, we'll let her finish her content and then we'll come to it.
Mr. Moderator, wouldn't that be the decision of Rohini?
Rohini,
Okay,
would
I
you
would
like to take
to
the
take
question?
a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, ma'am, when you're talking about the university life and social interaction, how do you think that is a better form of social interaction as to what has already been proposed by the proposition in terms of experiential learning, in terms of independent study, in terms of internships? We have already proposed such interactive methods of study. Why do you think a university life is a better way?
Okay. Thank you for your question. If I quote, internship, you take place in a very organized structure, which is also a type of formal education, sir, which has a point to be noted. And university life is obviously I've provided you examples to prove my point. If you look at the startups of Google, Facebook, DHL, I think it proves enough than what I can answer at the moment. Okay. Now, the proposition team, they have questioned about humanity will cease to exist unless there's a apocalypse, a word that I have difficulty in pronouncing, whatever. Okay, so humanity will not cease to exist, it will just exist in a worse way. That's what I would like to point out.
1 minute to go.
And lastly, I would like to conclude my speech that after hearing two remarkable speech made by the great speakers from the proposition team, I would like to say that society, the motion is in present tense. So I would like to concentrate more on the situations that taking in present tense. And I was reminded of a very famous quote by my favorite author, one of my favorite authors, that is P.G. Wodehouse. They were men who tried to find a leak in life's gas pipe with a lighted candle. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your speech, Rohini. And we'll now be moving forward with the next speaker, which is Pradyum Nihata, the government whip. But before we do, just a quick note to all the speakers. I understand that you might have quite a few questions, but try to sum up what you have to ask with one question, because interrupting a speaker, while it's completely allowable, is a bit disruptive. So in order to make sure that they can get across their content as best they can, please try to keep your questions to a bare minimum, but if necessary, of course, do go ahead. I will not stop you. Now, that being said, let's move on with the next speaker, which is, as I mentioned, Pradyum Nahata. Pradyum, feel free to begin when you want to.
Good afternoon, members of the House, respected judges, committee members. Now, today the motion is this House believes society can subsist without formal education, right? So what that leads us to a crux of the motion, which is, can society really subsist without formal education? Can it exist? Can it maintain itself? Not can it improve itself? We are talking about whether it can sustain itself, right? Now, I'm not saying that improvement or development is not at all necessary for subsistence. I do agree. And that is why today we have offered alternatives to formal education in the form of an informal educational setup. So the main today, as society has been defined by both sides, right? Today, a main composite of that definition of society has been culture. Since society is binded together by culture, since culture or common culture is a defining factor in uniting a society, today the main question is, does formal education really contribute to transmission of culture? Does formal education really contribute to traditions? Does formal education contribute to uniting society from the very grassroots level? And that is what I will explain in my speech, is that opposition has failed to prove that. Today, I think that the opposition has really not considered the full meaning of formal education. Today, we have divided formal education into primary education, secondary education, and higher education, right? Whereas the very outset of the opposition's argument is higher education, higher education, higher education, and when it comes to vocational education, which we have also explained in our speeches. So essentially, we have created two worlds, right? The proposition's world is where we have a post formal education society, where society is sustaining itself through informal educational setups, and the opposition has given you this world where formal education is removed. There is no discipline, there is only chaos, and thereby there is no standard to unite society. So understand the fact that the main clash between the proposition and the opposition has been the adaptability of human beings. Now we must question, is society a product of its environment, or is environment a product of its product of the society? Right. Today, the opposition's argument mainly has been that the environment is the product of society, right? However, how can the environment, how can the society not be a product of its environment? When we talk about revolutions, when we talk about mass movements in countries, we talk about movements in France, we talk about movements in Russia, which the Prime Minister himself mentioned. There are certain changes in society which bring about a transformation in society. Mind you, they don't bring about a collapse, they bring about a transformation of society. Today, the opposition has divided society into pre-industrial society, industrial society, and post-industrial society. What if I tell you that this is the same society? We all are, the very concept of society remains the same. The very eras are changing, right? It was pre-industrial, it is industrial, it is post-industrial. So it is adapting. So why can we not say that when we take away formal education, society will not collapse, society will transform? That is essentially what we are trying to tell you. If society can transform, which it will, considering the fact that the opposition itself has said that we have developed education, we have developed technology, we have developed innovation to such an extent that we do, it implies that we do have the ability to transform ourselves. And if we take away formal education, my main argument is we will transform, we will not collapse, right? Now, the second clash has been about discipline, right? The main argument of the opposition is that we will inculcate discipline through formal education, and the opposition has itself compared the rules which are inculcated in a formal educational setup to the laws which are implemented in a country, right? Now, I really want to explain that formal education is not only comprising of systemization, right? that it is not only systemic, it is also standardized. We are not saying that informal education cannot be systematized, right? We are saying that it will not be standardized. We have completely ignored the fact that formal education is also standardized, not only systematized. So what I'm saying is, if informal education is implemented, it obviously in any kind of effective education, there is systematization. But is there standardization? Standardization is completely unnecessary. Why we have standardization is because it's already been explained by my previous speakers. Because we want the people we are educating to cater to someone, to cater to the needs of someone. And what the proposition is telling you today is that no, don't standardize education. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of systematization. But if you standardize it, there will not be individualism. And if we are catering to individualism through vocational education, which itself is called industrial education, which we have proposed. The main also an argument proposed by the opposition is that industries need to be catered to, and vocational education, which we have proposed, is also called industrial education because it prepares people to work in factories, because it prepares people to work in their workplaces, right? That is what essentially the second speaker of side opposition has come up to you and said. They have mentioned doctors' law school, right? They have not mentioned any examples of primary education, secondary education. All they have mentioned is colleges, universities, and internships, right? So what about primary education? What about secondary education? We have completely ignored what the Prime Minister brought up. The Prime Minister told us that in primary school, in secondary school, we have different subjects. I might not like the same subjects. You might not like the same subjects. If we don't like the same subjects and we are having to study the same subjects, we are essentially wasting our time. Today's side opposition tells you that it is okay if we only start really learning, if we only start practically learning from higher education systems, which we do. We only actually learn for our employment purposes, for the purpose of contribution to society from universities, right? We only get to choose what subjects we want to learn in from universities. But are we getting to do that in secondary education, right? Primary education may be too early. We need linguistics. But considering the fact that in secondary education, there is not a lot of diversity in education. You only get a 6th subject in India, at least. You only get a sixth subject, and you expect to develop your practical thinking from that. I don't believe.
Pradyum, wrap up.
Right. Okay. And I would wrap up by trying to say that essentially when we are talking about society, we are talking about it transforming, right? You didn't see the Russian society collapse after the Russian Revolution. You saw a collapse of a political community. The Russian society obviously transformed, but the culture remained same. Russians had the same culture. The only political authority governing the Russians transformed. So why not transformation? Why only standardization? Thank you.
Thank you for your speech, Pradyum. We'll now move on with the next speaker, which is the final speaker for today's debate. Of course, the first part of it, which is Suryansh Jalan. Suryansh, are you with us?
Right, I'm here. So good evening, everyone. So I would like to start off by refuting a few points made by the Prime Minister government side Prime Minister. So he basically said that it was that internships are very necessary for education for colleges that it is very important for internships and mock trials to exist in colleges, and we need informal education for that. And there is and it is basically useless because it hinders the individuality of the students, and because the students may get bored of the subjects which they are not actually interested in. But I feel that it is very important for the students to have basic knowledge of every subject, so they know what's coming. Because basic knowledge is required for everything around us, and formal education also includes colleges and universities, where you can particularly choose your subjects according to your interests.
We have a question from Parikshit. Would you be willing to entertain it, or would you like to take it later?
No, I would like to not entertain it.
Okay, go ahead.
And the Prime Minister said that formal education does not prepare you for internships, but I feel that you need a specific skill set to intern in most companies, which a formal education provides. And several companies also set up internship camps in schools or colleges, which allow the students to sign up for internships, helping them to get jobs in those companies later on in life. And with the new education policies in India, we now have several options which allow individuality in the students according to their interests and subjects. And there are also several formal education, there are also many formal education institutions outside of India that teach you many practical skills. And it is, and according to the new education policies in India, they also include practical education such as farming, such as basic education of farming, plumbing, electricians, and also it also helps the students to study according to the language they choose. And
Suryansh, I'm so sorry to cut you off again, but there's another question from Pradyum. Would you be willing to entertain it?
Yeah,
Right, go ahead, Pradyum.
Thank you for your speech, sir. So you've spoken about how the new education policies in India bring about change, considering the fact that the public education system in India has been so poor contemporarily and historically too, and this education system or the new education policy itself will take around 10 years to implement. Do you seriously think this will bring about any visual or any tangible change in the education system as we know it?
Of course, it will bring about a lot of change in the education system, because now the students will be able to choose according to their interests, which they were earlier not able to do. So, and the Deputy Prime Minister said that doctors are as important as blacksmiths, but to become a doctor, you need a proper formal education, and a doctor needs to be formally trained under an institution to test whether the doctor is good enough to save a person's life. And a formal educational institution provides amenities and infrastructure to help the students to harness their knowledge and practically implement whatever they are taught. So you can't expect someone to informally or teach themselves how to perform surgery on a body. You can't find that on a YouTube tutorial. So the Deputy PM also asked us that mock trials don't have a set syllabus, so it contradicts the definition of formal education. Critical thinking is one skill set, is one skill essential for survival, and the point is that formal education teaches us this critical thinking by application of a fixed syllabus. The government whip said that the motion is whether the society can subsist or not, and is not actually about the progress of the society. But I feel that the society needs progress and improvement for subsistence, because if our ancestors had not educated themselves, we would still be out here we would still be out here rubbing two stones to actually to make fire, and we would not actually have any kind of amenities or technology which have been developed today. And I feel that petroleum fuel will also run out in a few years, so we need research and development which is done under formally educated scientists. And without these trained scientists, how would we have any new forms of energy? And without these, the earth would cease to exist.
I'm so sorry for cutting you off. There's another question from Parikshit. Would you like to entertain it?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Right, thank you for your speech, sir. So when you're talking about how critical thinking is taught under a set-piece syllabus, can you please give us an example under which learning the 14 points as to Germany's involvement in World War II can possibly make us understand how critical thinking functions?
So, like the deputy leader of opposition mentioned that the motion is in present tense. It is not about what the Nazis did back then, and the Nazi revolution has already come to an end, and it is about presently if the society can subsist or not further. I hope that answers your question.
Right, carry on.
And I would like to end by saying that formal education is extremely important for several occupations. Like I mentioned, doctors, pilots who are formally trained. And I would like to end by saying that without formal education, a society would cease to exist. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for your speech, Suryansh. That being said, we have come to the end of the first half of the debate, and moving on to the second, it is of course the reply round, which will be started off by the opposition, and then of course the proposition, which is the side of the government. Now, is there anyone from side opposition who would like to kick off the reply round?
Yeah, may I go forward?
Right. Sure. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mohana. You have 2 minutes. You may begin.
Yeah. So the side opposition came up with facts as to why formal education was so necessary for not only a society to exist but also to continue. Like I mentioned before in my speech, subsist does not only mean that it has to exist; it also means it has to continue. Furthermore, the side proposition stated the fact that because of the ideas that were propagated due to the formal education given, which caters to a particular system in where the formal education is being taught, the society can turn out to be dysfunctional. Well, guess what? The motion is not about whether society is dysfunctional or not. It is whether a society can exist or not. Furthermore, the government whip himself contradicted by saying that it is not about improving, but whether the society can subsist or not. Second of all, the deputy prime minister further went on to say that there are vocational schools and internships, which are sort of a way of informal education, but that is not true because they also have an entire system which caters and teaches the people who are studying over there. The people go over there to learn, and they do so in a proper system. Then the government whip further went on to say that formal education is like informal education is based on the culture of a society. Formal education is also catered to the culture of a society. It is done so that the society can, like the people who are going out into the society can adapt to it. Furthermore, the government whip went on to say that the universities help us to develop practical thinking, but that we did not speak about school. Well, have you forgotten that universities are also a part of formal education? Furthermore, what we learn in school, from that we choose what we want to pursue in universities or colleges. Um, Based on these facts, I can say with clarity that the opposition clearly has more definite and concrete facts to say that society can in fact not exist without formal education. Thank you.
With a pinpoint ending to your reply, the time for your reply, thank you very much, Mohana. We will now move on to that of the government. Is there anyone who'd like to start off or?
Yes, Suryansh, I'll be taking the role.
Right. Excellent. Parikshit, you may begin.
Right. I think today's members of the House today, the opposition's stance has been really convenient. Not only have they decided to copy speeches of YouTube, but they've also decided to come and tell us that society will cease to exist and the earth will cease to exist. And more than that, they've come and tell us in a very convenient fashion that they choose to only discuss universities and colleges and not the entire spectrum of formal education that we have in today's country or in today's society, when we also talk about schools and other forms of formally educated systems. That being said, let us look at the clashes that have existed in today's debate. Number one, we're talking about experiential learning as being a very integral part of education. Let us understand experiential learning programs do not comprise a form of formal education, primarily because there is no government policy or a national policy that ensures that there is a level of teaching that happens in experiential learning. We agree with the opposition when they come and tell us that there is a system around it, but we do not agree that system adheres to the understanding of formal education because that is not policy driven by a country. That being said, let us understand the second class that we have, which is about social interaction. The opposition believes that it is only at universities and colleges and perhaps even schools, if they give up the convenient stance, that there is only a level of social interaction that happens among students. Let us again understand social interaction is an integral part of how a society exists. And social interaction is not limited to just going to an educational institute, formal or not. That being said, we've also proposed systems such as experiential learning programs which exist and ensure that there is a level of social interaction. Let us also look at how they're talking about the national education policy of India. Number one, let us understand we are talking at a macro level and not only about India. That being said, the national education policy only raises the bar of the number of subjects you can possibly pursue. It does not let you pursue the knowledge or the discipline that you wish to pursue. A 6-subject increase to a new form of education is not saying that formal education is changing in any form or manner. That being said, they also tell us that doctors perhaps need a level of formal education as compared to a blacksmith. Let us understand again, in an equitable society, it is very important that every member of society functions at its epitome level. That being said, let us also understand how they're telling us about critical thinking being taught in syllabus-oriented studies. Let us understand the response to that, where they immediately a current form where I'm talking about how a history textbook teaches certain things, and I question on whether or not it ensures critical thinking, they take us back to tell us about Nazi Germany with an irrelevance to the question itself. Let us also look at the clashes that we have given the opportunity to our opposition to clash on.
Wrap up, please.
Absolutely. We've spoken about how social stability is dependent on improved and independent interaction. We've given them the Utopian model, which already works. We've already told them about the Brady-Johnson grand social polymathy demonstration theory. And these are things they have not decided to clash on at all. And we agree, and we assume that they agree with us on all those points, which essentially proves the basis of our burden. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much for the response, Parikshit. That being said, we have come to an end of the debate. Now, before I say anything, I'd like to hand it over to I think Anjali again before we declare results or any other such
So
festivities.
thank you so much, Suryansh. So just to sum it up in like a sentence, it was amazing. There were great points on both sides, and it was, I think, one of the best debates I've seen in a very long time. So before we actually get down to the results, etc., the judges will be going to the breakout room. Till then, I would just hand it over to our team. They'll be taking over and they'll be entertaining questions from the audience, as well as our wing members will be putting forward their opinion on the motion as a whole. Yeah. Vaishali, Snake, could you all please take over?
Right.
Yes, sure.
So, yeah, Vishal, you can go ahead.
All right. So first, I would like to ask if there are any questions from the audience, then I would like to take them. If you all have any questions, you can put it in the chat box or maybe raise your hand.
Yeah, any questions if you like to share your opinions on the debate, you can just raise your hand. Right. Adwaita, you can unmute yourself.
You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah.
If you want, you can switch on your video. It's completely up to you.
My question is that there was a speaker that mentioned about that if in primary school we can opt to not study certain subjects, then that would be a waste of time to study those subjects. But don't people have to have like a common understanding on certain facts? Otherwise, then how will society exist today? Because everyone has to have a certain particular things. Otherwise, then people will have different beliefs on certain facts. Then how will that work? That's all.
Right. So
Right.
whoever is in
Side government.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'll answer that question. Thank you for your question. In my speech, I did talk about how primary education and secondary education is not necessarily totally unnecessarily, because it does give us some sort of general knowledge that all of us need. But I spoke about how most of the education has become redundant, except the very facts that we need to learn. You see, secondary education just continuing the syllabus of what the primary education taught, and it is trying to make us experiments in professionals in or like specialists in physics or chemistry. When somebody really takes on a subject, they should get to decide when they actually want to study it. But in the secondary education and the primary education, you are actually telling them to study that same subject that others are studying, even if they don't like it, through 6 years to 7 years. And that is why understand the fact that even 2-3 years become totally redundant, the education, and that is what hinders the progress of formal education needs to bring to society.
So I think, Adwaita, your question is answered. If anybody wants to ask another question, you may put it in the chat box or raise your hand. I would also like to give my opinion over here. Just like you said, we are learning. How many of you just imagine, like you have been studying, suppose you're studying for a board exam, suppose ICSE or CBSE or whatever. You are stressing out over those subjects which you don't want to study. Like okay, I'll
Right.
get to the question.
Yeah, Aritra, you can ask.
You really want to like I'm so sorry. You're studying for the same subjects. I mean, I might be sounding extremely stupid after listening to the great speakers that we have here. I mean, you get what I mean, right? Okay, next, the next question.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but can we have the moderator Suryansh to give his opinion too?
No, he's gonna. There's like time allotted for him to give his opinions. So after this time, yeah.
Yeah. So
My question.
yeah, the next question you can
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah. The question is for the proposition whip. Sir, in your speech, you mentioned about how you gave the example of how Uzupis was used as an example. But so it is when the opposition brought up the example of the new education policy in India, you very well stated that we must look at it from a global perspective. Now, why do you think such something as utopian as the Utopian concept, where art, it's basically a state for artists? How do you think it will sustain itself on a large societal platform, if it at all can?
I'll take that. I'll take that. Right. So I think that's a very valid question, but let us understand what we were talking about when we mentioned Uzupis and when we mentioned the NEP. The NEP is a government-oriented policy that is tailored only to the Indian community, the Indian society, the Indian nation. However, when we look at what Uzupis is creating, we look at it as a model. When they're talking about the NEP, can we see such a model in the entire world, anywhere in the world? Then no. And we have a question and we have a problem with the model which the NEP proposes, which is just increasing the number of options that you have to study. That does not create the ability to have free thought, the ability to pursue what you want, the ability to choose the vocation of your choice. However, when we look at the Uzupian model, we do not mean to say that it only works in Uzupis. We mean to say it works at a grander social structure. Again, the NEP is an untested policy by a government that intends to implement it over the next 15 years. We understand Uzupis is a tested model that has been tested since the 1990s and has proven itself, and on a greater and grander social construct as a model can serve to the purpose of today's debate.
Great. So do we have any more questions, or we could have some more committee members to maybe ask something or give their opinions?
Right, I can go ahead if that's fine. Right. So first of all, I love the debate. It was amazing. I actually like the arguments put forward by both the sides. They were really good and they were amazing. I think especially side government. I think they were like the first speaker. He like actually paved out the path for side opposition to rebut. And I remember I heard the speech, and he literally paved out the entire path for side op and like their arguments, and like which side opposition could have rebutted. And like secondly, how the deputy prime minister, his examples and his justification, they were marvelous. And the whip, his statement about environment and society, and the way he rebutted side opposition's point on discipline. I think I really loved that entire rebuttal. And overall, I really love the shade that was provided here on an informal note. I love the shade put forward. I'm not gonna name anybody, but I really love the shade. Okay. Anybody else from the audience, if you wish to give your opinions, ask any more questions. Right.
I think we had some questions before. Someone had raised their hand in the middle of the debate, but then we asked them to ask the question in the end. I think.
Was it from the audience?
Yeah, I think it was from the audience. Someone had raised their hand.
Okay.
Any other committee member, would you like to say anything?
Right. So I think when are they supposed to come back from the breakout room?
Whenever they're ready with the results. So we have to keep ourselves occupied, right? So
Okay,
does
right.
anybody else have any more opinions on? Okay.
Yeah. Or if the participants themselves, if they wish to say something, yeah, they can go
Any
ahead.
feedback or anything?
Yeah, any feedback. I can see like the government whip smiling for some reason. Right. So you guys can go ahead if you wish to.
Right. So I mean, I would just like to say that this was like a really great debate, but just like a piece of advice to the organizing committee: do not tolerate Parikshit asking so many questions, because he does that in every debate, literally.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind next time. If hopefully we can have another debate like this, we'll mute Parikshit and we'll switch off his video and we'll ask him not to ask any more questions.
Yeah, also
Are we really having an APD here? Are we really having an APD over here?
I mean,
The last
I
APD I did had 5 questions, but fine.
I really like appreciated the way like side government they put forward all these questions. I really like the POI, although like majority of them were from like Parikshit, but I did appreciate how they asked so many POIs like in
Rajin,
comparison
she
to.
just said that you're not mature.
I didn't say that, but
I agree.
yeah, I really appreciate the way they ask questions.
Yeah, I mean.
Also, can we please say something? Can we please not copy speeches from YouTube, especially if there are people from my school? And I think I'll
I
leave
did
it at that.
not do anything like that.
No,
I haven't
not
even-
you. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about a speech being copied of a debater from my school 7 years ago, which is all over YouTube. You didn't do it. You didn't do it. Someone else did. That person knows.
All right.
Hi everyone.
Hello, we're back. Okay. So did we entertain questions from the audience? Yeah?
Yes, we did.
Okay, that's good. All right.
Is ma'am here yet, Anjali? Is there?
I think she is. 1 second. Let me just check.
Yeah.
She is? Yeah, she should be. Ma'am? Oh, yeah, ma'am's here. Okay.
Okay, great. Then we can proceed.
Yeah. All right. So with that, we'll first have our, before like all our results, we'll have our judge say a few words about the motion. Ma'am, over to you.
Okay. First, I'd like to say that I found it very difficult to decide, because honestly speaking, a personal bias shouldn't carry through. And I think the debaters individually did a very good job of defining all the concepts. I mean, whether it was society, whether it was subsist, whether it was formal education, I think you did a lot of hair splitting, a lot of rumination, and it was thought provoking for me. So I also started wondering, whether it is, what is formal education, whether if one individual is trained formally, whether it's part of society, whether it's not part of society. So I think you have achieved a very big goal, because the whole purpose of debate, more than just coming to a conclusion and supporting any side, is it should be thought-provoking. And for that, I'd like to thank each and every one of you, because I think you really made me sit back and think about definitions as I understand them. And what I also enjoyed is, okay, there were some textbook definitions, but that always has to be the case, because you do have to consult them. But I did like the fact that you did try to define things on your own as you understand it. And I would have liked to see a little bit more of that. So I am not, okay, so personally speaking, I felt at first thought that maybe the debate was a little biased, because when you're bringing, so the two words I felt were juxtaposed, in the sense that, education, when you talk of education, definitely it is holding the structure and it is also creating a polish to take it forward. But when you're talking about subsistence, it does bring in existence into your thinking in a very different way. Because when you're thinking of subsistence, yes, you don't really need education of any sort to maybe subsist. But then again, subsist as a society, and when you bring in the definition of society. So yes, a lot of contradictory terms, and great debating out there with what is formal education, whether, and also definitions of society as we knew them. And also I like the fact that you brought in, whether now the concept of agrarian society, to when you're looking at agrarian society and a virtual society. So even definitions on that note really completely changed, because society as we recognize it today, and when you look back and think, whether that society looks like a society to you anymore. Yes, in the textbook, it may be referred to as a agrarian society. So all those things I think you need to question. And also one or two of the speakers touched on it a little bit, like, in the definition of society, like for a long time I thought just one half of the society was very much more educated. So whether that is social education or formal education, as in women were left out of it altogether. So I would have maybe liked a little bit more, that all of that brought into the picture. But excellent topic, very, very well debated. And if you ask me personally, I felt it is one-sided because the word subsist exists. But having said that, I did not bring that into my judging, because judging was done purely on, I did look at whatever criteria Anjali sent me, and I went on how you illustrated it and how you defined it and how each one defended itself. And I liked Parikshit's questions a lot. Also Pradyum's questions, and I liked your attitude, because that is a very important part of education. In fact, though the opposition mentioned critical thinking, I think the proposition was doing the critical thinking. So it's not just taking it like lying down. I like the fact that you questioned, because that is a very important part of education, to question things as you're learning it. And I would have liked to see the opposition do that more. They were great on their own content and defining it, but when it came to questioning them and holding them on point, that I felt you could have done a little bit more forcefully. So now I'm going to hand it over to Anjali to tell us what happened.
All right. Okay. After ma'am's words, I would like Suryansh to say his opinion on the motion.
Thank you very much, Anjali. Now, speaking on the motion in itself, while my personal opinion on the motion differs from that of Ma'am Sreela Mitra, I will not let my own thoughts on the motion come in here. I'll only comment on what I saw in today's debate. Now, being the moderator, I was taking a few notes while I was listening to your speeches. So if I took a little bit of time recognizing your questions, that was probably why. Now, on a very general basis, a few aspects that you could have really touched upon when it came to the points you were making was, the different types of formal education, right? When you guys were talking about education, you were talking about it in a very generalized manner, right? Or education itself does this, education itself does that. But like for example, Anuj, you brought about, I have to take 10 subjects and I like this and I like that, but there are multiple different types of boards, like the IGCSE, the CBSE, or the IB, so on and so forth. Each board has these are again formal educational systems that have different ways they bring in your different schools of thought. Now, talk about how different sources of education exist, right? Because education, what you learn, the information you're exposed to, doesn't only come from your schools. It doesn't come from university. Whether it be Reddit or an Instagram article or or a source from a Wikipedia reference, you can get information from many different places. So when anyone's arguing about the subsistence of education, you must try to bring in how there are different sources that exist, right? Why do these different philosophers these sayings by different philosophers exist? Why do these philosophers say what they say? Where do we pick up these textbook knowledges from the primary sources? That is what they have said, right? Now you can yourself harness them with your own curiosity to learn, to educate yourself, right? But then there is also another aspect, that is, where is that grassroots knowledge coming from? So this motion, I personally see this motion as very in a very half and half basis, right? At the grassroots level, learning your ABCs, your multiplications, your grammar, this and that, sure, formal education works there, structured education works there, but the curiosity to expand from there, that is what the formal education system should teach you. That is what you should branch out and then move on to these Reddit sources and so on and so forth. Now, coming to like speakers and stuff, to give you a little bit of feedback, right? I'll try to keep this as short as possible. I don't want to take too much of your time with my own boring gyan, to colloquially state it. So I'll start with Anuj. I really liked how you brought in historic examples, set precedents over what you're trying to say. However, I'll also point out to you that while it is, some people do try to explain that my later speakers are gonna say this and this, you're kind of taking the spotlight away from what they are trying to say. Like, I personally, when I'm listening to speeches, I would rather like to be wowed by the points brought up by them rather than being told what to come for. It really takes away the element of fun from it. But if you're trying to go for a more structured approach, which in my opinion I think you did, it was a very good way to go about it, and I commend you on it. Moving on to Mohana. Oh no, before I move on, Anuj, I also felt that when you were speaking throughout, you kept the same tone. Think about it like a wave, right? A wave moves, it goes up and down and up and down. It there's a bit of changes in its movement, right? But then it was your speech was kind of in a more flat line basis. To explain what I'm trying to say is that you kept saying the same thing in the same way. Even when you're trying to slam a point down, you're trying to suggest that this is what they're going to bring up and this is what you should look out for. Try to say it in a more like impactful manner. Throw your voice, because it's not like I'm not telling you to keep your mic right up in your face and just scream into it. Just try to mix it up a bit. Through all the speakers for that matter, try to bring in as much flamboyance as you can, right? Moving on to Mohana. I found your tone to be very, very good, because when you were making those assumptions, you were bringing that interrogative attitude into it. So that's something I really liked about your speaking style. I felt that your the way you made your case, the example that you were bringing in was good, but it reminded me of something I teach as many people as I can when it comes to debating, right? It's that when you're researching for a debate, when this applies to everyone here, even if you're watching, when you're researching for a debate, when you're trying to structure your speeches, don't research just so you can make constructives. Research so you're educated enough to make sure that you can take the questions coming to you, because a lot of you were very threatened by Parikshit's questions, suddenly had these animated reactions to them, right? Now, another thing which I will point out to you, while someone may bring in bigger words, which I'm not saying Parikshit did to intimidate you, even if someone is trying to intimidate you in any way possible, when if they're trying to hide a lot of the flaws in their arguments behind oratory, you're going well, right? If they're trying to mix up a lot of their questions, there's some kind of inherent flaw in it. So be attentive to the question, and if you don't know how to answer it, try to digress from the point. Try and I would try and make as many I refrain from using unparliamentary language, but try to bullshit your way out of it if you have to, right? Try to make sure that you can if you're not able to answer the question, try to find another way out, right? Don't try to stammer and show that there's a little bit of weakness to it. Try to twist his words against him, which is what a lot of people try to do. Parikshit, as a matter of fact, also brought in quite, like, try to turn the words against you. So which brings me to another point. try to try to be careful with the words you use, right? Make sure that you say it in a way someone can't take your words and push it up against you. Now, moving on to Parikshit, right? I think Miss Mitra aptly stated exactly what I felt about Parikshit's speech. So, yeah, Parikshit, you had some very good constructives, and I personally, going back to different debates with you, I really love the Uzupis example. Now, moving on to Rohini, I felt that your constructives were excellent. The logic you brought in was excellent. Again, as I mentioned, try to be a bit more flamboyant with your speaking style, and there's no point crediting a speaker unnecessarily and saying it's going to be tough to move on from Parikshit, because try to be a bit more confident in your own content, because what you're saying made amazing amount of sense, more than what most people thought others said. I tried to take down as many of your constructives as I could, but you showered me with a lot of very good points. But try to now, rather than just identifying these points, try to explain some of them, right? You don't need to give me 50 good points, give me 10 good points, but explain them well. You have 7 minutes, so try to make the point, explain it, give the evidence to link to it, and move forward from there, right? Moving on to Pradyum, again, Pradyum, I've spoken to you about, your speeches before. I find your speeches to have amazing content. I like your tone. I like your style of speaking. But, I felt that, you're trying to explain many points at the same time. So when you're trying to do it, you're mixing one point with another, and sometimes the logic is swaying a bit. I see what you were getting at, so I understood the logic behind it, and I found it was solid logic. But you should try to, go point by point. Start by saying, this is what I'm trying to say. Explain it. The evidence, you have a lot of evidence. You have very good research. So bring that research in there. Then say, now I'm going to bring in this. Now I'm going to do that. Because when you have such a long-ended speech, something like a 7 to 8 minute speech, you have a lot of time to explain. So when you're throwing everything out and then moving towards your refutation because you're a whip, you're getting very convoluted. You're moving from refutation to constructive. And finally, to Suryansh, I love the name, by the way. Take your time. Take your time with your speeches, right? You're trying to rush through your points, and again, similar to Pradyum, you're moving through your points very often. You're moving through what you're trying to say very, very quickly, trying to put it out there and get it over and done with. But with a long-ended speech, it's not just about the kind of constructives you make. It's not about the quality of constructives you make. It's how you say them as well. I could just as easily be lying down on my bed with my laptop just about facing me and telling you the same thing while drinking milk, but you won't care about my opinion then, would you? You wouldn't care about like what I'm trying to say if I'm not saying it in a polished manner. So try to, structure yourself in a way in which you can, get the attention of the viewers, because your good points are one half of the debate. The viewers listening to it is another, because I believe the very reason I got into debating itself was to change opinions, to make people think the way I think, as narcissistic as it might be, right? If you want to win awards, just to debate just to win awards, I recommend you find another area. But you must, because I feel that when you're debating, try to debate the opinion. Even if you don't believe in it, try even if you're put in a stance that you don't agree with, try to structure it in a way when you can really make the person think. Because when it comes to something like the subsistence of education, and in a formal and informal, try to define what's informal. What do you see as informal? Because all of you are going at formal is good or formal is bad. Look at what is informal. Is informal this good? What is the aspects of informal that you can look into, right? Now, I don't want to take any much more of your time. I've spoken enough as it is. So, Anjali, over to you. And again, to SpeakSmart, to Ma'am Sreela Mitra, to Anjali, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure being here. I found the debate to be very constructive, and I hope the speakers here can take back whatever they can. So, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Suryansh, for that great feedback for all our speakers. With that, I would just like to say that I think both ma'am and Suryansh have more or less covered everything. For me, all the speakers, there were certain speakers that stood out for me a lot. And you can see the results, and I'll put my comments down then. But as a whole, this debate had a lot of open-ended words. And in even the briefing meeting that we conducted, we said that it was a completely open definition. It was up to the participants how they want to define it. And I think the definitions were great. And it was a great debate all in all. And with that, I would, yeah, sorry.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. If you can just check your private chat, it makes that.
Sure. With that, I would like to go to Omika, who will be giving the word of thanks. Omika, go ahead.
Right, just give me a second, please. Okay. This debate has, well, firstly, we're well within time, and I'm sure that you're tired of staying glued onto your screen for this long. But I'm not going to pass in any comments of my own. I think the moderator and Mrs. Mitra poured in a whole lot of perspectives that could be brought in, things that we could have worked on, and of course, how brilliant each and every speaker was. So let me just begin with the vote of thanks. So we've now reached that part of an event where most of us fall asleep. However, at SpeakSmart, we believe that nothing is complete without saying thank you. On that note, I would like to begin by thanking our judge for today, Mrs. Mitra, for her presence, her time, and her guidance. And you are also our beloved Sreela ma'am, without whom no event at SpeakSmart is ever possible to be conducted. And more importantly, you touch the lives of every single student you walk into. I would also like to thank our moderator for today, Suryansh, for his time and steering this debate towards success. I personally really like the way you kept notes and you actually helped after post all the speakers, you had feedback to give. And most importantly, I'd like to tell you that this was our first event with an external moderator. And I think midway through, our nervousness was completely quelled. You've set the bar high for our prospective moderators. A huge thank you to each and every one of our participants as well as attendees. You help us create and sustain this platform. There is no student wing without you. And a special thank you to all our participants for being so enthusiastic and for dealing with all our formal messages and instructions. You did it. Last but never the least, kudos to the SpeakSmart Senior Student Wing, our content team headed by President Raima Chatterjee Ray and Vice President Kanush Katarka, who worked in the document and all other content, literally speaking, for this debate. You are the backbone of our team. Our creative team headed by President Mehak Gupta and Vice President Ayana Chatterjee for the multiple flyers that were released over social media, as well as the certificates that will go out post this session. I know you're waiting for the results. It'll just take a minute more. And what would we do without creative, really? Our tech team headed by President Rohan Aryamarda for handling all the technical proceedings for today. You're lucky you didn't get to hear his buzzer. Our committee members, without whom it is indispensable for the SpeakSmart Student Wing to function. And finally, this is the part where I'm supposed to not choke up, so I won't. Thank you to our president, Anjali Ladha. This is practically my last event with you, Anjali, and it makes me realize how far we have come. You have never succumbed to rash decisions and have at every step led this team with dignity, grace, and of course, your charming laughter, which you didn't unmute today, so we didn't get to hear. You are the light of our team, and if I could, I would never let that go. Congratulations, guys. We ended 2020 with a bang. Thank you very much to all of you for being here today. I really hope I haven't got disconnected as of now. No, I haven't. I had a poor internet the other day. And if Anjali is here, I'd like to hand it over back to you for the awards. Sorry, I think she's having a bit of an internet issue. Just a second, guys. Okay, so I'll do the awards then. Unless Anjali is not here. Ma'am, would you like to take over since Anjali is not here? I think maybe you can go ahead.
Omika, you can go ahead. Should we get Anjali is back? Yeah, so.
Oh, she's back. Okay, great.
My bad. My connection always goes off at the wrong time. Anyway. All right. So with that, we have come down to the results for today. So first and foremost, we have the best interjection for today, which goes to Pradyum Nahata. Congratulations, Pradyum. I can just see the reaction on his face. But anyway, congratulations. You had some great questions and it really did stand out. Coming to our two best speakers for this evening, Parikshit Roy Chaudhary. Congratulations, Parikshit. And yeah, and now coming to the winning team for this evening, it was Team Proposition.
Best speakers, Anjali, you forgot.
Ma'am, I'll just get back to you on that in a second.
Ma'am, we haven't forgotten, but there is something that could
there's some issues. So Omika, could you please coordinate that with ma'am?
Yeah,
yeah, and of course, the winning team for this evening, it goes to Team Proposition. Some great speeches, lot of great style. That's what stood out the most for us. I'll just be quickly spotlighting everyone on Team Proposition. Parikshit, we had Anuj and Pradyum. Congratulations to all of you. All right, so with that, I would just like to say that today is officially my last event, signing off as president for the SpeakSmart Student Wing. We have ended this year with a very big bang. I think 2020 has been great. So with that, I would just like to say for the last time, thank you so much for all of you for attending and participating in this debate. A huge shout out to to my whole team and Sreela ma'am. Thank you so much for always being by my side. And with that, that's about it for today. And can we just one last time, can we please have the poll out for all the attendees to actually discuss, like, to just poll out who they thought was the winning side as well, whether it was proposition or opposition, it's up to you. This is just our way of getting everyone to interact. Okay. All right, so that's a clear win for side
proposition, the side proposition.
Side proposition. So with that, I would just like to end the event, and I would request everyone to leave, except and all wing members to stay back.
Please don't leave the WhatsApp group as of now for the participants. Your certificates will be posted post the session. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much for elevating our standard of debates.
Rohan, can you please